Unblended Coffee. It serves Sophia, but also Barry is part of the team. Hello. And Carolina, she's also part of the team. She's a coffee producer, farmer, Colombia that's joining us for this trip.
Nice. So that's also Taylor back there. Darren and Brad somewhere. Up there, there goes Brad. So what we wanted to do today is basically bring you two different coffees grown by the same person. But they're actually the same coffee, they're just handled differently. And we wanted to share exactly why that's important and sort of like, share our excitement about that, because when we found these coffees, we were really, really excited about it. I think it's extremely special, and it's like, I think it's a valuable piece of knowledge that can like help you appreciate the coffee more. So we wanted to sort of share that with you guys. Yeah. So a few things, right? So we have coffees back there brewed, and in case you haven't tried it before, you can go ahead and just sip on it whenever you feel like it. But we'll do a cupping later, so maybe don't get too over caffeinated. If you need water, there's water as well. Bathrooms are in the back corner over there, as well as in the cafe. So just real quick, I'm gonna run over like some basic coffee knowledge. We call it like sort of seed to cup type like information. But with that, sort of, I'll just explain to you like kind of what coffee is, and then from there, we'll have the Unblended team sort of talk about what coffee is to them and like how they live their life and all that kind of stuff. So cool. Coffee is three different things to us. It's a plant, it's a drink, and then it's an experience, right? So you can make coffee at home, of course, but you come to the cafe for the experience. It's a drink which you're consuming, and then it's also a plant, and it's like a lifestyle, so it's an agricultural product. In a lot of ways, like, if you can acknowledge and appreciate all three of those things, like I think there is a lot to be learned from coffee, and sort of you can apply that to other things. In a lot of ways, when we approach a new coffee, we sort of think about, what does this coffee say to us, and sort of what do we want it to say to you guys as well. I think that these coffees in particular are very, very unique, and we wanted to sort of display how unique they are. So coffee has come together. It's either picked or grown or whatever in different countries. These two are coming from Colombia. Specifically, they're from Ethiopia and Santa Barbara, right? Yeah. And from there, they're processed. And processing, we'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. Specifically, like what does processing mean? How are they processed? And then we each will have a regular, traditionally processed Colombian as well, or we cup there. From there, we are roasting the coffee. So roasting occurs in our big machines over here. We have two different roasters over here. From there, roasting is like a process similar to baking or sort of working in an oven. And we'll describe more about our roasting approach afterwards. But from there, we're brewing the coffee and we're serving it to you guys. So I just wanted to sort of give you like a quick, very, very brief run through. And then from there, we'll be a little bit more interactive. And yeah. All right. So, ready?
We want this to be dynamic. It's a Sunday. We don't want to be like a class or anything. So I'm going to explain the philosophy around why this is important and why we're so grateful that you took time out of your Sunday to come here. And then we're going to ask you to stand up and see this stage with Carolina, who's a coffee grower herself, and she's going to explain to you the anatomy of a coffee cherry. This is what it's harvested. It was harvested on Wednesday, brought it up in a little on the screen, and here we have it. And this part is very important because it will give you the context to understand why in the fermentation phase you can get different flavor profiles like the ones that you're tasting. So hopefully by now being able to taste a little bit of
No
each
respires.
flavors, and you can have it in your mind at least a curiosity. After you come here, we're gonna ask you to sit down, and then we're going to do a little bit of a step-by-step explanation of the fermentation, and we're going to infer what did it cause the different flavor profiles. And afterwards, we're going to get Andres himself. He's going to explain his take, his design process, and we're going to do a Q&A where you guys can ask him a lot of questions while we do a formal copy. In that phase, probably Martin can explain about the roasting and how he approached these coffees different.
And in fact, how we even chose these two coffees. I think that was a pretty interesting story.
Yeah.
So cool.
Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for coming out. And I want to start this conversation by saying that we are Unblended Coffee, and we, in a traditional supply chain, will be like an importer, but we'd like to, understand ourselves as more as of distributors or a green coffee sales company that works with roasters. Fundamentally, because more than a logistic, what we want to do is add value to the product and represent a group of, in this case, farmers or brands, which are Carolina and Andres, and I'll tell you guys more about it. But I want to start you guys with the one story that like really changed perhaps my life and why we're doing what we're doing. And is it the moment I found out back in 2018 that the average age of a coffee producer in Colombia is 63? I was like, there's a problem. But not only coffee farming, like in the US, the average age of a farmer is over 60 in the US. And just yesterday, I found out that in the US, the suicide rate of farmers is higher than the suicide rate of veterans. And the veteran suicide rate is already too high, So we have a problem with our society and how we're structuring our farming systems that is larger than coffee. But we're here because we like coffee. And I think coffee would be the perfect segue to get people interested in our lands and our farming because of the romanticism and the mysticism that it has. So at Unblended, our mission is to bring the youth and make them interested in farming, coffee farming. And we have a program called UVI, it's called Unblended Ventula Institute, that works with the sons and daughters of traditional farmers or young farmers like Carolina. Right? And then through a program of mentorship and shared resources, we help them develop brands. So Carolina doesn't have just one product that she sells to the traditional cooperative, it would be like the traditional Colombian wash, but we help them come up with a portfolio of different products, and that way her company becomes more profitable, diverse, attractive, and she can promote her own brand. So Andres is one of the best examples because he's been in the program for the longest. So Andres has 5 different coffees in his portfolio of products, and we're going to try 2 of them today. Carolina is somewhat newer. She's been with us for a year, and she already has 4 different products. None of them you can try today, but hopefully soon we'll be able to hear their coffees. Okay, so that's on what we do at Unblended, on our mission, and what we're trying to achieve. And if you allow me, I'll tell you guys the world that we dream is for hopefully one day, a kid would, when they get asked what do you want to do when you grow up, is one more and more for them to be like, I want to be a farmer. I want to be a coffee farmer. That's the world we're pursuing. And you have no idea how much of that responsibility lands on us, on you guys as consumers. And it brings it back as of why events like this are so important. Because today, not only you will understand the difficulty that goes into processing a coffee, but also on the importance of supporting and encouraging a woman like Carolina in her decision of going back to the farm from the city. Right. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy our talk, and I hope it's going to at least change how you see coffee for a few weeks. You know. So please come up and let us show you guys what a coffee cherry looks like. How many of you this is the first time you've seen a coffee cherry? One, two, three. Good. Good. Please come up here. Yeah, come on. Come on.
It is kind of like a range of how, like, right? Each one of these things is also is the best.
Yeah.
Yes.
Café excepto colombiano estándar.
Okay, so so she says this one would be okay for a traditional coffee, traditional white coffee. On the coffee table, we're going to try one coffee like that, not from Andres, but from then this would be an okay cherry for that one, but not for what Andres is doing. Why?
El punto de maduración depende de la concentración de azúcares. Entonces, cuando yo quiero hacer un proceso donde los sabores dependen de la concentración de azúcares que yo tenga, no puedo tener esas notas de acidez que generan casi esos granos que están totalmente maduros. Entonces, la fermentación, los organismos que actúan en la fermentación actúan no tengo una alta concentración de azúcares, esas levaduras y esos microorganismos nos van a enfermar todo.
Okay, so a little bit of context and starting from the back to sorry, is that flavors are created by the transformation of sugars into alcohol and CO2. And that process creates soft products that we perceive as flavors, right? Like when you go to a brewery and they have different types of yeast and they create like full flavor bananas. Same happens in coffee. What causes these flavors are the microorganisms. So she says that microorganisms work with sugars. So whenever the starting product for the fermentation is not on the optimal level of sugar, then you're going to get results that are not optimal. So she's saying, and this is you can pass this around to sushi people. Now imagine that you are having 100 kilo bag, you're climbing a steep mountain and it's raining, and you just harvested that cherry, thinking it was good, but it's not enough. Really, the hard part of coffee processing and farming is one of the hardest part is exactly what you're going to see that this cherry is not optimal for one of the processes that we're going to try today.
But what you can do as a partner is like after you have all the cherries that you pick and see like how many are there
Not all of them mix, but it just limits the fermentation that you can do. So for that, if you have a lot of those cherries, you need to do a wash of coffee.
Are these different levels of like maturity?
Yes.
But this one would be not good. You for a wash.
So something important is like when we're talking about fermentation and that kind of stuff. So if you guys ever really like those, so like our coffees that are a little bit more exciting, a little bit more like fruity, a little bit more bolder in how they taste and like how vibrant they are. A lot of those coffees are created in the fermentation process. Like those flavors that are more exciting, that are more like really happy when you try them. A lot of those are created in the fermentation. And if the fermentation isn't like supplied with enough sugars, like if it isn't like done properly and like have that by that it won't taste good. It'll taste a little bit more gross. And I think like that's something important to understand. If you're fermenting with for quality cherry, the resulting product of the cup won't be great. And I think like there's a lot to be like gained from understanding just how difficult this is and like how much of that coffee they can actually ferment because like, you're doing well. But I think something important is like if you look at this one, this looks great, especially if you look at it like this one. But once you pick it and then you look, you're like, oh, this is no longer good. It's hard. I tried to pick stuff, and it was me and a couple of friends, and we picked cherries for like 6 of us, right? Like for 30 minutes or so, and we all came in with cherries, and I would say maybe a third of them we couldn't use because we were so bad at picking. So that's one thing, and then after we sort it, there's a process called loading, where another percentage of your cherries that look perfect, you can no longer use either. So there's a lot into the sorting that's like extremely important, especially when it comes to really interesting coffees. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, so
Are you looking for, is it like color, size, like firmness? Is it a combination of all of that?
Que realmente uno puede usar cuando se sabe que no está perfecto en el de maduración. Que si es como la forma, el color, la textura, hay dos cosas importantes. Uno, la concentración de frutas se divide en grados Brix y hay un aparatico para medir los grados Brix. Entonces, cuando empiezas a hacer procesos, como en el caso de Andrés, empieza a ser necesario que seas más técnico, más preciso y medir la cantidad de azúcares.
So she said that the most important part is the translation of color in sugar. So when you're becoming more technical and developing processes that require more these fermentations, then you have to start measuring the bricks that you do it with a machine and it measures the level of sugars.
Los agricultores tradicionales hacen cada tanto, que es como una vez al año, una vez cada 2 años, hacen una medición de Brix y miran más o menos cuál es el color que indica el punto de maduración de su finca, porque el color puede variar de una finca a otra, porque en la finca el color sea más oscuro en su grado de maduración y en otra finca sea más claro, finalmente depende de cada altura en la que se ubica.
So she says that we cannot standardize color because at each different farm, depending on the altitude, the region, the variety, the optimal level of sugar changes. So what she does is that every year she measures the bricks, the optimal bricks color, and then she goes back and says, okay, this is the right color for my farm. And then the hard part becomes teaching all the pickers what the right color they need to pursue for that harvest, right? It's not like you have to measure the bricks every single, but you have to get a range that works for your farm. And it cannot be, replicate all farms and get this color.
Generalmente en altura llueve más, entonces como la cantidad de agua en el suelo hace que los granos se demoren más en madurarse y que también dificulten la concentración de azúcar. El árbol lo que hace generalmente es en las noches está como en un proceso de.
So this question was like, is it altitude or are there other factors that influence the color of their sugar level? And she said, yeah, it's the altitude, the level of rain. I mean, because if the farm is at higher altitude, it will take more time to mature.
That's why, like coffee from high altitude have this idea of being better than the ones that are in low latitude because they take more time to develop first.
Like the stress of growing at a higher altitude, it takes longer for you to have the same product, and like more of it is like sugar versus things.
En las noches el café, el árbol de café lo que hace es concentrarse en el fruto, en concentrar los carbohidratos en el fruto. En el día hay sol, el árbol hace fotosíntesis y está muy concentrado en el árbol. Entonces el árbol es concentrado en las hojas y todo. En las noches es cuando ocurre la concentración de azúcar. En los climas más fríos, pues en temperatura más alta, ese proceso es más lento, o sea, por el mismo es más lento, pero como en el día no hay tanto calor, no hay tanto sol usualmente, entonces es más eficiente el proceso de concentración de carbohidratos y de crecimiento de la planta. Entonces, por eso generalmente los cafés de altura son mejores, concentran más los sabores, es más largo y menos productivos.
So the biological explanation of why the concentration of sugar is that at night the tree develops carbohydrates for its roots, and during the day it's the photosynthesis process that's focused on the growth of the tree. Growth of the tree. But in a region where the less sun because of the altitude and the climate, then the tree will focus on carbohydrate creation and not so much on growth. So that was like the development. So let's see that. More volunteers. And now you guys are processing coffee. So coffee is a product that you don't need the fruit. You can try it. You guys want to try it?
It's interesting because it tastes like honeysuckle. I don't know if it'll taste like it because it's a little bit fermented, but it does taste like honeysuckle a little bit. You feel? You see how much of the seed is actually the fruit, right? It's like nearly all of it.
Yeah. So in coffee,
Yeah. If you guys want to either dump right there or right here or whatever, just dump them on. We're watching it, whatever.
Yeah. We're thinking if farming grows,
so up until like maybe 10 years ago, the whole point of like the point of the coffee process was to get from harvesting to the seed to this process as fast as you could, because time that would be spent in between would be inefficient. It would be time that the farm is not producing, and like you're not getting money. But they started to understand that the time that's spent between here and here actually did some really good things for the cup. It resulted in different flavors than maybe a mechanical farm that would go from here to here in less than 24 hours. So then research started to be done in that process of getting rid of the peel and the pulp and the parchment to see what effects would have in flavor. And then it leads to the next part of the presentation. So this would be the kit like this.
Yes.
And then you would see that the bean is covered by like a mucilage, little sticky thing, which is full of sugars. And then it's covered by a dry peel called parchment. That's not then okay. Robert will help us get the context for how flavor is equal.
Do you do anything with the outside?
Yes,
Yeah.
this is the dried skin.
It's also fertilized. So they collect it all and they use it again as a crop, or they take it out through the natural process and use it for beverage.
So it's a beverage called cascara, and it's brewed like a tea. We can try it a little bit. He actually has a cascara company called Coffee. Okay, so now we're going to sit back down and then we're going to go a little bit into the coffee process. With Martin, he met like last year. So we worked with different roasters throughout the US. Yeah, Kirk is one of them. Marvin has been to Colombia like twice this year already.
You mentioned your importer technology in the US.
Yeah, we are an importer, but we live in Colombia. So our company is a South Carolina LLC. Yeah, so it's based here, but we live there. Barry lives here. Okay, so um,
Next slide, please.
If I break it, we're good. Okay.
did Andres get connected?
He is connected.
He is connected. Can you give us the next slide, please, Jess?
Yes. All right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, so tra traditionally, like if we talk about a logistics role, then we are an importer, and then we would work with an exporter out of Colombia, and then then we would sell to a roaster, and the roasters would sell to a cafe, and then you guys would buy the coffee from a cafe or a supermarket, right? But now with that technology makes the world a lot closer, it creates opportunity for creating value or telling the story differently. So we believe that the closer that we work together, instead of a linear, a circular, we get more opportunities to allow, people like Carolina or Andres to tell their own stories, and it allows for opportunities for Marvin to go and test out ideas because he understands what you guys want, and Andres understands the farm level. So becomes opportunities for collaboration that would add more value to you guys, and more value to the customer translates into, hopefully more arguments for you guys to pay more, and that goes a long way in the whole supply chain. So exercises like this are important because it connects you to the source. when you're connected to the source, it creates a whole new world for ideas and collaboration, and that's how we're going to attract more young people into coffee farming, precisely.
Okay. Exactly.
I will learn. Okay.
Okay, so what we're here for is to meet Andres Cardona, the producer of the coffees we're tasting today. So he's Andres Cardona. We'll meet him virtually in a few minutes. He's 31 years old. He's been in coffee for 18 years, and he's been working with us for about 2 years now. He's from Santa Barbara, Antioquia, Colombia, has already been mentioned. I'm gonna next slide, please. You can see it in the map. That's his farm, Villa Lucia. Here is Santa Barbara, like 2 hours far from Medellin. Have you heard of Medellin? Yeah. So that's where he lives, exactly. Next slide. And that's not only because like we're used to talk about regions and altitude and all of that, but living in a high mountain and a coffee region is not his only advantage. He's been able to discover new coffee profiles and new coffee flavors, and that's what he's different. That's why he's different. And
So now with the context that you guys have, we're gonna dive deep into how you can modulate or affect the flavor that results into like, the different. You guys get to try the two coffees or what? Yeah. So you got that on reference in your. Okay. So traditionally, okay. So but 10 years ago, they this. Well, more recently, 10 years, they did the research on microorganisms. But longer than that, there were different ways to go from the fruit to the green coffee bean. And it falls into 3 main categories. Wash, that you use water to get rid of the skin and the fruit as fast as possible.
they take out the skin, then you see that the skin part of the bean, and you wash it all, and you get the bean just without anything.
So as you can imagine, these profiles are very clean and consistent. So South American coffees, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, even Costa Rican, have been traditionally washed because our supply chains are built for mass production and mass consumption, which requires consistency. And the most consistent process is washed. Then there is the honey process, which is literally this. Like you guys remove the skin, and that's it. And then you let this dry, and that's it. And then you mill it later when it's below 10 degrees of humidity.
A different level of time process.
There are different levels, so that's what we're gonna get to there. And then there is natural, which is traditionally how coffees in Africa have been processed. So you go and you harvest the cherry, you let it dry until it's dry. Right? So how we see it is water, we take out the skin, or we just let it dry. Okay. So and then 10 years ago, people started studying how can we, like what happens between here and here? Does it affect flavor? Like, are there different levels? Are there different levels of naturals? Are there different levels of honeys? Are there different levels of washed? And the answer is yes, and each one of them have yield different results. Okay, so the difference between the Luna Azul and the Red Sunset, by the way, he named those because they don't fall in any of those 3 categories, so he just made up a name, like to create a recipe, sort of. Uh-oh.
It is an old building. Oh, next.
Yes. So he created which all of you guys must have already try the Red Sunset and the Luna Azul. And for us, was very important two things that we asked Marvin. That the label had both his name and the coffee name that he had chosen, which he named them Luna Azul and Red Sunset in English. Like Red Sunset, he named that in English, and he named that in Spanish. And he wanted to represent, a universe of flavors. So he chose a theme of the universe, like, or the sun and the moon. He has another coffee called Galaxy. So we worked with him to develop his whole season of coffees around this main idea. So he started with the same variety, Caturra and Castillo, right? From Caturra Castillo and Colombia. These are traditional varieties that are very present all around Colombia. In fact, the base coffee that we have, what variety would that be?
I think that one is Colombia and
Colombia. So yeah, same varieties. So it started with a more meticulous harvesting and selection process, like the one just went for the optimal sugar levels, so he could start with a good base. Then he did the floating process that Marvin said, which is basically taking these cherries and dumping them in water to select the more dense, and the ones that are less dense would float, and you remove those. And then it starts a different recipe that yields the different flavors. So the Red Sunset would have a fermentation in tanks like this, in bigger tanks. You can pass this around and see how the fermentation is already changing the flavors
and
then the color.
the bottle, you'll notice that it's actually kind of pressurized.
Yeah,
That would,
the CO2.
yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, and it's only been like a couple days and not like.
You
there's
can
only a
smell it.
few
You can
cherries.
smell it too.
I think something interesting to note is like, depending on how many cherries you start with, what material you're growing there, it can have a different effect on the fermentation as well. So yeah, smelling it is like definitely very interesting.
Yeah. So do we have any microbiome aficionados here? No? You? A little bit? Okay. So which microorganism survives to an environment without oxygen? No, fungi and mold need oxygen. They need oxygen. So, well, I just saw one. Yes. Maybe there are more. No, I'm not. That's why I need an expert. So yeast is a microorganism that survives in an environment without oxygen, and it creates CO2 and alcohol. And like the subproducts, like the poop of the yeast, are flavor compounds that we like. So we basically are fan of yeast. So at this stage, the coffee, there is a yeast development process that is transforming the sugars into CO2, alcohol, and flavor compounds. Yeah, so this would be the Red Sunset. Okay. Then, after 72 hours of this process, then the cherries are depulped using a depulper and water. They will look kind of the same. Yeah. And then if you can see, there is some sort of water that results for the fermentation. There's like a little bit of juice coming out. You guys see? You guys see?
And when you're out in the birthdays, you want.
Is that where you measure the first? Yeah. So in a larger process, this juice would be more significant. So what they do with the Red Sunset is that they have this batch, they get the juice out, they put it separately, and then with a new batch, they add that already fermenting juice. So they would take these cherries, depulp them, put them in a tank, and pour an older and more fermented juice in it. Yeah, we'll show you pictures. And then they are they're left there for 5 more days, and then they're dried. So now that's the red sunset. Okay. Then the Luna Azul, which would be, this process would fall into the washed and honey category somewhere in the middle, with an additional fermentation, prioritizing yeast creation without oxygen. Okay. Then the Luna Azul is, you start here, same farm, same variety, same selection, and then you put them in an open tank. So now you're not restricting oxygen, you're inviting other microorganisms, yeast, bacteria now, and you're creating different types of acids. When bacteria is present, then acetic acid is created, which creates vinegar, wine. So more of those flavors will translate into alcohol. So 330 hours of fermentation of the cherries like this, but open. Then it's depulped without using water. So like what you guys did, this is a depulping without sachet. And then it's dry. So it will be honey with an extended fermentation that looks like between honey and a natural, right? 330 hours. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to. Yeah, so I guess I spoke faster than the pictures. But this is how it looks, 330 hours of fermentation in cherry, and this is how it looks 72 hours of fermentation in cherry. This would be sealed and this would be open. So then the red sunset depulp using water, and then the Luna Azul depulp without using water, and it looks more like what you guys did in the little recipe. And then the red sunset comes back into tanks. People pour Andres pours all juice in them, and then yeah, but this picture is not at that stage. This is just to represent the idea of how it looks at the moment. And then the Luna Azul has no fermentation after it's being depulped. It goes to the drying beds. Yep, these are the drying beds. So they basically take out with a pan from the tanks, or they just spread them to a bed where it needs. Yeah. So the red sunset looks lighter, and then the Luna Azul looks darker. And this is what these are the sugars being fermented creates that color. But what's most important is the philosophy behind all this, which is to get you guys to perceive something different, arise curiosity, and see value in the two differences, really. So now at this point, you want to hear from Andres, or what do you want to? Or what do you want to?
So yes, we want to hear from Andres and sort of get any comments that he wants to throw in there.
Okay, so just what would be the best way to bring?
He is still connected. Okay. So. Do you want to ask him if he's ready to speak?
Andres? Andrés,
He unmuted. Oh, sí.
¿Tienes ahí la cámara?
Let me drag it over here and make it bigger, and I'll put it back. Okay. How do I make it bigger? There we go.
That's Andres. It's on.
Yes, you magnify that.
Sorry, what?
No, magnify and make it bigger.
I'm trying. Are we done with this part?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're done with the.
Get rid of that. And then I can't see over there. I need to. There we go. I'm sorry.
So you want to pin him? Yeah. So,
Oh, it is, so I'll unpin us.
yes.
Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay. Now I just need to get him over there. Yay!
Andrés,
Can we make this go away?
Yeah, just slide it over.
¿me escuchas ahí?
Sí,
Ah, qué bueno. Bueno, aquí lo que pasa es que if we can, I don't know, like show Andrés with the camera, everybody.
Or
Oh,
show him us.
Yeah.
Entonces estamos tomando un café. Estás ahí al frente, todo el mundo está viendo. Ahí es una pantalla grande. Y les acabamos de explicar el proceso del Red Sunset y el Luna Azul. Y ahorita lo vamos a catar. Aquí ya les estuvimos mostrando con una botella todas las cerezas. Hablamos de las fermentaciones, todo el proceso. Bueno, queríamos escuchar de ti, que te presentaras y de pronto contarás como un poco sobre el proceso de diseño y lo hacen por partes para yo traducir.
no, hola a todos. Mi nombre es Andrés Cardona, productor de café de aquí del municipio de Santa Bárbara de Colombia. Muy orgulloso y placentero de tenerlos allá, representando mi café allá.
He says his name is Andres Cardona and he's very proud. He's a producer from Santa Barbara, Antioquia, and he's very proud of having his coffee here and having it in front of you guys, and he's super excited.
Nice. So we're very happy to have your coffee as well.
Estamos muy contentos de tener tu café acá, Andrés.
¿Cómo, Lucas?
The mic
Oh,
is
yeah,
over.
the
O sea, que estamos muy contentos de tener tu café aquí también.
Ok.
All right.
Andrés, ¿qué quisieras contarle acerca del diseño de estos dos procesos? ¿Cómo los pensaste y de pronto qué has pensado hacia el futuro?
Pues, Lucas, la verdad, estos dos cafés que hicimos los hice en colaboración con nuestro amigo Felipe. Él fue el que, entre él, José y yo, nos ingeniamos a hacer estos dos cafés con un buen resultado, teniendo un excelente resultado.
So he said that in the design process, he got help from Felipe and Jose, which are part of the UB, I guess, structure or program. And Felipe has many other processes, and he's been a mentor of Andres. And he said that he's happy to see the good results they've had.
Does anyone has like any question about
¿Qué produce todo eso?
¿Qué tan grandes son? ¿Se escucha esa pregunta? ¿Qué tan grandes son las fincas? She asked, how big is Andres' farm?
Lo poquito que te entendí, qué tan grande es la finca, pues
Sí.
la de mis padres es alrededor de 4 hectáreas, ¿cierto? Y la del tío, que es la de Villalucía, son 9 hectáreas.
Yeah, so he has 4 hectares in his parents' farm, and then he also gets some cherries from his uncle, who has a farm of 9 hectares. A little bigger. Andrés, cuéntale un poquito de qué te gusta, pues, como tu historia del café.
Pues Lucas, mi historia siempre ha sido en medio del café. Desde que nací, mis padres han sido cafeteros, mis tíos, mis abuelos. Entonces eso es lo que más me ha motivado a seguir la tradición e innovar con los procesos de fermentación y transformación del café. No con lo tradicional, sino con lo modernizar del proceso de café para tener lo que tenemos allá, una taza diferente a lo que tradicionalmente se ha producido.
So he said his parents, were coffee growers, but his motivation is not only like keep the tradition, but doing it differently with a focus on fermentation, of innovation, and creativity. ¿Otras preguntas? I'm sorry, other questions? Mike.
In the sort of way like chefs over the past couple of decades have become seen as like artists or like masters of their craft and sort of elevated to like artistic craft status. But I think we see like the coffee production and farmers slowly like kind of entering this. How does Andres feel about that, or like does he feel like that at all? How does he see that?
Andrés, ellos preguntan es, ¿cómo, si eventos como este, cómo te hacen sentir? La pregunta él decía que acá en Estados Unidos, en las últimas décadas, los chefs se habían como elevado a una categoría como de artistas. Que si tú tras de esos eventos o digamos ese tipo de relación, ¿sentías algo de eso?
Sí, claro, Lucas, lo llena a uno de orgullo, satisfacción y es reflejado el trabajo que uno hace acá en campo. Es bacano que le hagan el reconocimiento y que transmitan todo lo que detrás de una taza de café hay, porque realmente una taza de café trae muchas historias atrás.
Yeah, so he said, yeah, to these events, he definitely feels recognized and seen. And that he says that for him it's very important to be recognized and even praised because behind that cup of coffee there are so many stories that could be told, and he's glad that he's one of them.
Sorry. Let me add on, just as somebody who worked with stuff like this, it's really exciting being able to roast this because you get many different interpretations. I tried the Red Sunset in a bunch of different roasters, and I think we each have a different interpretation, but it's all sort of following the same theme. So I think a coffee beans that have no personality, they feel like this person like behind it. You work with it, it makes sure it's that.
Yo quería saber si se inspira de que en otras industrias como vino, cervezas, pan, para los procesos de fermentación.
No, he's asking if Andres has drawn inspiration in other industries that use fermentations. So I'm gonna ask Andres, but Felipe, who basically taught him how to process coffee like this, has drawn inspiration of the wine industry. It will be kind of the more similar because we're talking about fruit fermentation. Andrés, que si tú te buscas inspiración en otras industrias como el vino y la cerveza y el pan o en otras industrias para mejorar tus procesos de café.
Sí, Lucas, nosotros por lo general buscamos como asemejar los procesos de esos productos. De igual manera no es igual, no es lo mismo, pero sí en muchos aspectos nos ayudan y nos dan bases para hacer esos productos así, porque de igual manera no es lo mismo.
Yeah, he said that it's not the same, but you can draw some like inspiration or get fundamentals from like the wine industry. Yeah. So yes.
Okay, how long do they grow before they pick on average, and then what processes does his family use on their farms?
Processes?
Yeah, like do they do the wash? Do they do
Okay.
that type of?
Andrés, dice que cuánto se demora un árbol en producir. 3 años, ¿no? ¿Es productivo solo? 2 años.
Perdón, Lucas, no le entendí. ¿Cuánto se demora qué?
Un árbol desde bebé hasta produciendo, es la pregunta. 2 años.
Ok. Desde que se siembra,
Sí.
la primer granos que empieza a producir empieza alrededor de los 20 a 22 meses. Ya la cosecha buena a partir de los 2 años y pues 3 años prácticamente, que ya empieza a dar buena producción.
You say it takes 20 to 22 months to give the first harvest, but a good production with better sugar levels and more production comes at the 3rd year.
Y luego, ¿qué tan seguido?
¿Qué tan seguido? Well, I can answer that. So how often they harvest? So in Colombia, there are 2 main harvests. The harvest and it's called the travieso. But in most farms, you get a small harvest every month. So, ahora, ¿en tu finca cada cuánto hacen una recolección? ¿Cada mes? Okay.
Dependiendo, ahorita que ahí tenemos los granos brocados para hacer control de broca, se puede hacer incluso hasta 15 días una recolección que es recoger como los granos cuando uno ve que están madurando, trae muchos, si uno no quiere utilizar químicos, pues toca estar recogiendo. Pero los graneos, pues en traviesa, que es el primer semestre, más o menos 2 meses y en cosecha 3 meses. De septiembre a noviembre.
So yeah,
Pero depende de la zona. En Antioquia, pero en Nariño es una sola cosecha que es el mayo, que es mucho más alto y más fino. De resto se recomienda.
So she says that in Antioquia, they harvest every 2 weeks, but smaller quantities. They have a big harvest that lasts 3 months and a smaller harvest that lasts 2 months. Right? But in between, depending on if it's a large farm, you can get a significant production every 2 weeks, which makes it very exciting for processes like this. Okay, you want
Yeah. Let's start. We can still ask
Andres will be here
and stuff like that. But I think like the cupping will probably take maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So like while we're doing that, in case anybody needs to go, we want you to be able to try the coffees and sort of see, and like how Lucas say, perceive the value here, because like these coffees are extremely unique, and I think the best way to sort of like understand that is through a cupping. So like if you guys wouldn't mind, we can gather around, we can still talk. If you have any questions, feel free to like ask. But has anyone not done a cupping before? Okay, one. All right, so I'm going to run through it relatively quickly. So cuppings are basically our way as like coffee professionals, whether it be roasters, whether it be growers, whether it be like people who just work around green coffee. This is how we evaluate like coffee, right? And the great thing about a cupping is all of the variables are exactly the same. The way we grind it, the water that we use, the way we brew it, the amount of water, the amount of coffee, everything's exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the coffee, and that gives us a great, great way to sort of understand the changes that are going on here. So on this table we have 3 different coffees, right? So we have our core Colombia, and this one is what we consider a good example of what people are kind of coffee. And then we have both of Andres' coffees, and we want for you to be able to understand, like, even if you can't really pick out notes or anything like that, I always say if you can understand there's a difference, I'm more than happy with that, right? So first thing that we'll do is we'll go around and we'll give it a smell. The smell of the grounds is what we call fragrance. From there, we'll hit it with some hot water, and then we'll be able to smell the aroma from there, and then we'll taste it out. Sounds good? All right, so everybody come through real quick and sort of give it a smell. We'll try to like do it maybe like, we'll give it like 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to smell. So that way it's not gonna go too fast or something like that. But yeah, go ahead. And you know, don't be shy. There's plenty of coffee to go around. Don't be too aggressive either. And make sure you're putting it back wherever you got it from. That's the only thing. Yeah. So like there's 3 different ones on there. 2 that are on this side are Andres Coffee, and the one that's on the back side is the for Colombian that we have. Did anybody sort of perceive differences already, or anything stand out? Or that? Yeah, I think so. Like how you're saying, fruit is a note that is sort of influenced by how heavy the fermentation is, and in a lot of fermentation, or fermentation heavy coffees, fruit notes and like heavier chocolates are very, very common. But we'll be able to definitely perceive a lot of differences as brews and as we taste it. So I'm going to hit these this order. And so we typically allow we typically allow, I can't talk with you, but obviously. We typically allow the coffees to brew for 4 minutes. Just a pretty easy, that's what we calibrated it to. So if you ever decide you want to do something at home, you basically, whatever makes it taste good, you go from there. Most people do something between 3 to 5 minutes. So you can do almost relatively easy. It's so 3, 2. And now, as we get it with hot water, there are a few things that are going to change about coffees and its smell, its aroma. So the key difference between the hot and the ground smell, the hot water smell and the ground smell is that right now, as hot water is hitting this coffee, there are acids that are being dissolved. And in those acids, you get a lot of the character of the coffee. While the coffee is just grounds, a lot of times you can't really tell like the characteristics of the acidity. And acidity is always good in coffee. It's even if it's a low acidity or hardly perceptible acidity, I think acidity is always what sort of defines a coffee and its character. If the coffee didn't have acidity, it would not be very tasty. Even if you like notes that are a little bit more subtle, like nutty notes or tobacco notes or stuff like that, that's all coming from the acidity. And I think being able to sort of like perceive the differences. So yeah, go around and sort of smell again, but try not to hit the bowls. They're quite hot, so don't burn yourself. And you can sort of bend down and stick your nose over it. Don't stick your nose inside of it, but it happens. So how forgiving. Yeah, and sort of thinking you can like get more of a difference. Does anything smell more fruity? Does it smell more chocolatey? Does it smell more nuance? Yeah. Yeah. So temperature, something around 200 degrees. So basically temperature that you can probably use for like brewing your coffee at home. And water, I would probably use the same water that you would use for brewing your coffee. But if you're unsure, don't use Savannah tap water. It is really, really bad. Some places can get away with it. But if you're ever like, you want some water that's like tastes pretty good, I like to go to like either Kroger or like Publix or something like that and get their generic drinking water. So not the high quality stuff, because like their stuff is too hard. When water is too hard, it makes a coffee taste like astringent. You want something that is preferably not free from minerals, but not too heavy in minerals either. So that's why I say the generic stuff works pretty well. Also, a friend of mine told me like that magnesium water that you make for like babies. That one works pretty well. But like either one of those can work. I just have like a little thing. Or if you're really lazy like how I was, I would double filter my water. So like I had a filter on my tap, but there was like a back when I used to live in Atlanta, I had a filter on my tap or like on your fridge or whatever, and then I just ran it through a Brita filter too. That works too. So you don't want to keep buying bottles of just water.
There's wisdom.
Yeah, third wave is great. I mean, I was just thinking about like, you know, accessible ways for people to like have tasty coffee. No, at the cafe we have a tap where actually, sorry, I'm gonna answer this question as we sort of break. I know you want to. All right. So we're just gonna go through and break, and then everybody else is gonna come and smell, and we're gonna notice there's it's gonna be like a more intense smell. Every time after you break, you make sure you do that. Go ahead and run through it because we don't want it to get over. And then everybody else come through, sort of smell. But to answer, what was I saying? Third wave works great. I think. Oh, yes, what I do at cafe. No, that's not what we do at the cafe. We have a system that basically pulls out enough of the negative, like the excessive minerals and, of course, all of the compounds that don't really work, like chlorine and stuff like that. I mean, it's good to have that in your tap water so that you don't like get like bacteria and other kinds of stuff like as it sits in the pipe. But it's terrible for coffee. Any sort of things that are, so basically anything that's not bicarbonate, magnesium, sodium, or calcium is bad for coffee, taste-wise. So, yes, we have a reverse osmosis type filter, but it's not completely, that is more so reducing. And then it'll add back a little bit. So there's different types of filters depending on how bad the water is. And from there, you can sort of just like, pick and choose what works best. But water is a very, very, very complex thing. And there's a lot of like rabbit holes we can get into. But does anybody sort of smell a difference between the three? Yeah? Is how obvious is the difference? Is it extremely obvious? Is it extremely different? So especially between these two coffees, because we want to stress again, these coffees are literally the exact same. The only difference is how they decided to place the fermentation. And like I think that's something that's like it shows the skill that Andres has to be able to sort of like manage that and like get not just one good coffee, but two good coffee. Because like honestly, coffee tastes good at all. It's kind of like it's impressive when you look at all of the things that go through it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think you'll notice that there are some similarities between the house coffee and then the wash on anaerobic, and that's because they're similar in process, like how Lucas was talking about with the washed honey natural. These ones are similar in process, right? So you'll get a lot of the you'll get like the traditional Colombian notes will come through from that because they're both coffees that come from maybe similar like environments, but they're just handled a little bit differently. And there's a nuance between it, but you'll get like similar notes, maybe. But like, of course, there'll be a different quality, different like perception and all that. This one will be probably more similar to like if we have a natural blend, you would probably say this is more closely associated with that. And that's just due to the fermentation. But there's nuances between all of these things. And like, there's no right or wrong answers. Like, mostly we just want you guys to sort of be able to say, wow, these things are different, and like be able to understand like these differences were intentional. I think we'll probably give it another 2 minutes before we start tasting because it's still kind of hot. You don't want to burn your tongue, but then you won't be able to taste anything. But yeah. Questions? We can still ask Andres questions or whoever, like, you know. Yeah, I wanted you guys to be able to taste it while Andres was still there asking questions, so that way you can be like, hey, or if you wanted to like give your compliments or whatever, you know, compliments to the chef.
Okay, talk a little bit about your approach to roasting.
Oh yeah. So with roasting these, right? They are clearly doing two different things. Like they're kind of very different in what they're doing. And I wanted to sort of highlight that, not really like force it or cover it up or anything like that. So when I approached the Luna, we wanted this to be as vibrant and like sweet as possible, right? So like there's a lot of interesting blue flavored notes in there. And there's also like a really good chocolatey note that follows it, right? So we wanted to sit into that. With the Luna was a relatively faster roast, and that's just because coffees that have heavier fermentation, they roast easier, right? And it was relatively faster, not as high in temperature.
That's because the bean has more sugar in the outside part, so they kind of cook faster than less.
Yes, also more sugar on the outside part, but also like I think the bean's structure is a little bit more like, I don't want to say damaged, but it's like a little bit more malleable. And in washed coffees, because the fermentation time is a little bit shorter, or a lot of times like the coffee needs more energy for it to work, for it to taste good. So you'll notice that too. But a lot of natural coffees, like they just roast easier as opposed to washed coffee. And then also, like how Sophia said, the sugars on the outside, you don't want to burn them. They take color really easy. And color is basically how we measure like roast. Other questions? Yeah, wait, no. The sunset. So the sunset, in similar, was actually a little bit more difficult to roast because the Luna, you throw it in there, it tastes amazing. You just basically want any interpretation of that. But I think the Luna is like both the more difficult to roast and brew often. But I actually really enjoyed that one the most. Because this one has a very narrow line for margin of error. Because there is a really, really sweet, like almost fresh coffee cherry flavor that is there. But because the coffee is a washed Colombian, Colombian coffees traditionally have a higher like density, so they need more energy to roast it. But like how Sophia was saying, you know, you don't want to cook out all of that flavor that's on the outside from the fermentation. So you have to like throttle, you have this sort of straddle that line and basically get it far enough where it tastes fully cooked and not like astringent or like grassy or something like that. But you don't really cook off all of the additional flavor from the fermentation. So this one was the more interesting one to roast, and I actually like the coffees are a little bit more difficult to roast, but I think this coffee has a very good payoff. You'll notice that it's extremely sweet and like candy-like, and like kind of glossy in its like acidity. While this one is a little juicy and like just chocolatey and like very tasty. So I think they both do different things, and you know, it's just a matter of like different strokes for one. All right, cool. So I think it's about time we can go ahead and start tasting now. What we'll do is this. I'll demonstrate exactly how. We need more. I think. Does everybody have like their initial glass? So I'm thinking we can probably use that. That would be pretty good. If we need more, I think we'll have a stack. Okay. Yeah, probably, just in case. If you don't have your cups, we'll grab you a bowl and a few. But, so with cupping, the most important part is that you are slurping. So with slurping, what that does is aerates the coffee and allows the coffee to travel all the way across your mouth, even to the back. So that way you get the perception of drinking without having to drink, you know? There are taste buds even in the back of your throat and on the roof of your mouth and everything like that. So it's good that you get the full perception of coffee. What you're tasting is mostly smell. So it's also important that the coffee sort of reaches your nasal area as well, because taste is basically only sweet, sour, salty, umami, and bitter, right? But the differences in between these, like from cherry to sort of sugarcane, like these differences appear because of the aromas. So you take a spoon, a little bit, don't dip too deep. If you dip too deep, you'll kick up grounds, and then it won't be good for whoever's behind. So you take a little bit, put it into your bowl. Yeah. Sweet. And then, from there, we'll discuss about differences and stuff like that. But if you do need to spit, we have cups right here. So if you're over caffeinated already, we can spit out from here. But if you don't need to spit, that's fine too. I know some people are caffeine sensitive, so no harm, no foul. I have to because I drink so much coffee at daytime. So yes, please come. If you need more cups, we have a couple glasses here. Does everybody have a cup? Also, don't put your cup down because there's a lot of people and you don't want to mix up. Extremely important, as you go in between the coffees, sort of give your spoon a dip in one of these pours, so that way you're not transferring the flavor of one to the other. Yeah. That is a big difference. I'm glad. It's yeah, awesome. All right, guys, pack it up. I'm done. Yeah, so I think with cuppies, right? Remember, everything is exactly the same. The only difference is the coffee itself. So any sort of differences you're tasting, whether it be body, sweetness, acidity, all that kind of stuff, is specifically just because of the coffee. And also we have a more traditional Colombian coffee on this side too, so don't forget to try that one as well. Ever? Celery? Oh, probably my bad. No, I don't. So this is different. So in theory, extremely light roast, yes. None of our coffee are extremely. Yeah, and I also don't think properly roasted coffee If it's hard to roast, then that's a like roasting, not really brewing. So there are vibrant coffees that are very simple, medium size, medium. So this one is probably darker than each of the other, even though it's roasted fast, it's more vibrant than.
But it's never in a factory.
No. So I don't try to roast and be like, okay, we want a light roast. I mean, sometimes we'll be like, okay, we want this coffee to satisfy a certain thing. So if we're roasting the coffee to the espresso, then I'll go with extractability, see if I can extract the coffee. But if I want the coffee to just taste good, then I make sure it tastes good while it's able to extract it. Is it hard to prove? So the heat can be hard to prove. How easy is it for you to just throw it in there and pour it in? Some coffees are kind of difficult to roast, as in, like you have to be very specific with your recipe, or I mean, just like how. So it can be preference. So preference is like an example, a really, really easy. It's a easy. So in fact, like you sort of get that, like if you created like the viscosity of like this, a lot of times like you need like French press really simple. The only difference is like you processes. So you can do that. Like really exactly the same. Stir it up, down, and then separate it. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I mean, it's there are different brewers. So when you talk about marketing, I would probably describe like a harder heavy as a easier there's you have to know like hey what price to use how yeah it's one of the most difficult plants it's because it holds that if you pour these two the holes are small that if you pour hard that soft but okay, so any other questions that we want to sort of ask Andres? Do we want to ask Andres more questions? Or like now that we have an example do we see why he called it Luna Azul and then Red Sunset? Which one is yeah. Oh yeah.
Andrés, ¿sigues allí? Andrés,
Sí, sí, por aquí ando.
¿cuál es el favor, cuál le gusta más, el Red Sunset o el Luna Azul?
La verdad, todos dos son muy buenos, pero sí me inclino más por el Red Sunset.
Okay, he likes the Red Sunset better. But he likes both.
Yeah. So I think this one is a crowd pleaser, but I think this one has like a cult following from what I've noticed. Like there's people who enjoy it a lot, like both, but like I think that one is like more like interesting in initial taste because it's similar to like just things that people associate with.
So like yeah, you know, in the coffee, taste that.
Yeah. Honestly, probably this one. I mean, I really like my favorite coffee that we have on at the moment is this. Java is good. I mean, I like more subtle where I can drink like for 3 or 4 and I also like glossy acidity, right? So with these one, like I would describe the Java as more punchy, but like this one is like it almost feels like you're sucking on a candy, you know? And I really, really like that kind of acidity. And I also don't necessarily like the most punchy type of coffees. I know we have a lot, but like, I'm not against it, but like, I prefer it to be a little bit more clean. The Costa Rica? Actually, that was my favorite. And I think it was my favorite until I drank it so much until I'm like, all right, I'm kind of done now. But that was. And that makes sense because like the Costa Rica is a yellow honey, which is similar. It's like if we were to describe processing spectrum from wash to natural. So wash, then like an anaerobic, like a heavier fermentation wash, and then it goes into like yellow honey, then it goes into black honey, then it goes to like a natural. And it makes sort of sense why we like stuff like similar in like fermentation level if we're interested in that type of stuff. But yeah.
I think the middle ground of like semi-washed honey is really comforting to me because there are a lot of similarities between like what you expect from coffee, like if you're like for me, like your coffee every day and multiple times a day. So it's like sometimes I want a coffee that's just a coffee, but having those a little bit more like complexity and the acidity developed in like the fermentation. It's nice because like you're not just drinking like a very basic coffee, but you have like characteristics of that, and it's interesting enough like this is actually like a more elevated version of like the thing that I grew up drinking. Basically. Yeah, that's why I typically gravitate to the middle spectrum, and I really like extended fermentation, natural something like that. But for me, it's not every single day. Yeah. So I will like buy like a bag like this and a bag like that with alternation.
Yeah. I think so. Something that I think is really great about like this. Did you get all of these? Yeah. I think it helps a lot like for like keeping it inside the house. Also, honestly, yeah, I would imagine that it works really, really well on ice because it's just really, really sweet. So something that I just thought about as I tasted this one, and we were talking about it earlier, how if you're not taking and using the best ripeness, like the most ripe coffee, you get sort of the stringency, and I sort of got that in this cup. And like I think you were saying, like maybe slightly vegetable, and I kind of see that, but I think it's more so like the stringency that you get from like a vegetable that it isn't cooked, right? And not to say this is not good, and not to say that that's not okay, but it's more perceptive, especially when you taste these three right next to each other. These two, like they're clean and they just go down. This one, it goes down and almost feels like a I don't know how to describe it. Like if you had, like, yeah, more. Think about like a slightly undercooked Brussels sprout type thing. But like if you do have the opportunity to feel like it, maybe like going next to these two and like going back and forth and think about like a slight stringency that happens, and think about that as a sort of cupping experience, and like this is sort of the effort of how Andres chooses his coffee, like what he uses when he processes it. And that's specifically just from picking. And I've learned that right now, so I just decided to share that. Like, I mean, I sort of understood that, but it didn't really click until I had it right here. And we just talked about the extreme importance of choosing the most right cherry. But yeah.
I don't know if you
That's a good point. I think Sophia is leading onto like how it's stronger or more punchy because it has heavier fermentation. And I think
That's the acetic acid that's created with the because of the bacteria. And then this one had yeast. Yeah, this one had yeast creation or yeast development. So the flavors would be more like cloves, like flavors that you could also find on a yeah.
yogurt, like
Like think of a Belgian beer that's heavy on the yeast flavors. So it's very subtle. But if you compare a Belgian beer with these two coffees, it will be more similar to this than to that one. Because that one has the same acidity as a vinegar and wine, acetic acid. And this one would be malic acid that's created by the yeast. And that's why you can like go back and design a coffee. It's like what type of flavor do I want to have, and then you go back and see, okay, do I want to promote a bacteria growth, yeast growth? I want to have some activity. I want to have a more round. But yeah. Any last questions before we let Andres go? Okay. This
well, guys, of course you can stay and keep tasting it. Literally brew the coffee, come hang out, you know. So you could stay, but like, of course, you don't have to. But yeah, like, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate it. Like, we at Perk, we love sharing great coffee with you, and that's our goal of like working, like drinking great coffee and like having these kind of conversations. So, yeah.
We have some gifts for you for showing up. Where you wanna wear it or just give it to a friend or not. But because you came here, you're helping our mission of making coffee farming a more exciting career path, and hopefully invite more young people to be into agriculture. So, who wants to raise it? Right there.
Where else can we buy unblended coffee anywhere else in the area?
Yeah, in Atlanta, we have portrait, but if you go to our website, you'll see you want to buy it. And also,
There'd be like a list of.
When you're done with whatever, you can just like leave it on, maybe not on table, but like leave it on this table, and I'll. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh.
3 days away from back.
No. It's well, oh, yeah. I mean,
They never get help a lot.
Sign up free? Thank you. You're welcome. Very, very. Yeah, let's see. Andrés, chao. Muchas gracias.
Oh,
Hey guys, say bye to Andrés. Say bye to Andrés. Bye. Chao, vemos.
chao. Gracias.
Vale.
Who else wants to brace it?